Hudson had lunged for the gangplank, hoping that the shoreline would provide some relief from a middle that churned more than the water the ship cut through. Then, as now, steady ground had provided only a modicum of relief. He was able to eat more than a few swallows at a time, and he'd been able to fill his nose with a scent other than fish and salt. Oh, how he missed being able to take a deep breath and enjoy the aroma of grass, leather, and horse. At the second port, he'd tried staying on the ship, hoping to maintain what little adjustment he'd been able to make to the vessel's constant motion. But the heaving of a boat at dock was even worse than it had been at sea. So, this third time around, he'd gotten off. He'd focused on getting in a few hearty meals and having his shirts laundered, since he frequently sweated through them as he tossed about on his small bed in moaning misery. Sleep was elusive, as lying down only made the room spin, so he was forced to spend his one evening ashore trying to sleep in a chair, but at least he'd strengthened his resolve enough to make it to the next port. One port at a time, and eventually, with the Lord's blessing, he'd make it to England. The thud of quick footfalls pounded down the dock behind Hudson, and he barely had the presence of mind to brace himself before the runner grazed his side. With a spin that sent a pounding pain spiraling through his brain and down his spine, Hudson kept himself and the boy from dropping into the water. "Ho there," Hudson said, searching his throbbing brain for a name. The boy and the rest of his family were taking the same ship, along with their Indian caretaker, or ayah, but he hadn't spent a great deal of time with them or any of the other handful of passengers, as he'd been too busy clinging to his bed. "It's a bit too far to swim to England. Better we take the ship instead." He pulled them both from the edge, looking around for someone, anyone, to take responsibility for the lad. The little boy, who looked the very spit of Hudson when he'd been 9 or 10, grinned, seemingly unconcerned about the fact that he was alone on a dock in a strange country. "I wonder what England is like." "You and me both," Hudson murmured. Everything he'd seen on this journey, when he managed to peel open his eyes, had looked more foreign than he had anticipated. How much different would England be? For the past 28 years, the country had been nothing more than a blob on the globe, a faraway land that starred in all his father's stories and preparations for the future. He glanced around the port. Would that blob look and sound this strange when they got there in a few very long months? Another visual search revealed no panicked caretaker. Should he escort the boy to the ship? Was the rest of the family aboard already, assuming the boy was among them? If Jesus' parents could leave him behind in a synagogue, it had to be feasible for the parents of a normal human boy to misplace him. Probably prudent to stay where he was, especially since that meant another few moments in which his world only seemed to roll about. What did one do with a boy when one could barely think straight enough to remember one's own name, much less someone else's? His inadvertent companion clutched a finely carved wooden horse in his arms. Hudson might not know anything about boys, but he knew God's most graceful creatures very well. He pointed at the carved animal. "Do you like horses?" The boy nodded vigorously. "Papa bought it for me in the market. He says one day I'll have a horse just like this, and I'll ride him through the park. I think I'll name him Chicken." Hudson was still trying to come to grips with the strange name for an equine as the boy barreled on, the jumbled mess of words making it evident that he was as fascinated by horses as Hudson was, even if he didn't yet know how to properly name one. "Henry?" cried a female with a thick Tamil accent a few minutes later. An Indian woman rushed across the docks, 2 younger children in tow. She muttered under her breath about young boys with more excitement than sense, and Hudson bit his lip to smother the grin. "Ayah, look! Papa bought me a horse!" The boy proudly held his carving aloft, abandoning Hudson as if they hadn't been in the middle of a discussion about the shapes of muzzles on different breeds of horses. A finely dressed man and woman walked up behind the harried ayah. The woman's mouth was pressed into a tight, thin line, while the man looked somewhat unsure of how to feel as he gave Hudson a nod. "Thank you for watching out for my son, Lord Stildon." So Hudson had formerly met them at some point then. Like England, the title had been little more than a mark on paper for most of his life. It was familiar enough that he knew to answer to it, but hearing it aloud still gave him pause. The man, Mr.